Prove yourself as a pro in Docker and Docker Swarm. A well-known claim is that Docker is not suitable for databases, mainly due to performance considerations. What is your view on this? Can by using volumes or TMPFS mount, these issues can be solved? What are the key pros and cons of using Docker for databases? Also, explain whether Dockerizing is necessary for a big data environment like Apache, Hadoop, or Spark. Explain how to keep the container alive even when the Docker daemon is down. What are the Google's distrustless images? What's the difference between it and Alpine distribution in terms of softwares bundled? How to view the logs for the last 1 hour? Logs for a particular date tail the log of a container continuously. Explain how to launch GUI applications from container. For instance, explain how to run a JavaFX or Python desktop application on the host machine from the container so that containers can be used for software distribution. Is it possible to distribute desktop apps using Docker? How to get the IP address and gateway details of the container. List 5 ways to get it. How to start containers that will run as user with normal privileges and not as root user. What's the key issue addressed by using Docker run command with option device write BPS? What is a command to list all the ports used by a container? How to list all mapped ports in a container? List at least 2 ways to do it. Explain in detail about the Docker's file system. What is UFS? Also explain about snapshotting FS and VFS and their use case scenarios. What is meant by topology awareness? List few products that are topology aware of rack, zone, region for a Docker-based environment. Answer the below simple questions. Why layers are important in Docker? What are the commands that will create layers? How to list Docker layers of a container? Where layers can be physically located? What is AUFS and how it related to layers in Docker? Answer the below simple questions. What is the difference between Docker PS and Docker PSA commands? How to list the non-running containers? How to list containers that are using Redis image? How to list the containers that exit before last 30 minutes? How to list containers that have ports 80 and 443 published? How to list containers with their commands? Answer the below simple questions. How to copy Docker images between hosts? What are the different ways to do the same? Like using volumes, what are the other ways to handle persistent data in containers? Explain about Docker default profile and the steps to create a new profile with different set of permissions. Explain the simple commands listed below. Explain the below simple commands. Explain the below simple command. Answer the below simple interview questions. How many containers you had in your production? Explain about your production environment and deployment lifecycle. How the services are linked in older versions of Docker and in newer versions. Do you use EE or CE edition? Why? Have you used plugins for volumes and logging? Explain in detail about their performance and the issues faced. How to set the Docker daemon to listen to a TCP socket and what is the importance of port 2376. What is the role of the command? Can an application in a Docker container can access the file? Mention 5 Docker best practices similar to this one. Single application per container. In the output of Docker info command, The below is observed. How to fix this? Explain in detail about Docker image forgery, replay attack, and how to proactively prevent them. Have you used Notary in your projects? How does signer, client, server interact in Notary? What is the root key and different type of keys involved in a transaction? Demo how to flatten Docker image to remove history of layers associated with the image. What are the different ways to do it and why it is important for securing information. How to remove only selected layers. Have you used DocWiz? What are the data containers or volume only containers? What are the pros and cons of using them? Is it possible to access containers data from the host? If yes, what are the different ways to do it? What are named volumes? Have you used TMPFS mount? When to use it? Will it reside on container or host memory? How to share them between containers? Is it possible for SWAMP services? Which option is recommended, TMPFS or mount? Explain the below commands, their difference and purposes. When to use volumes and when to use bind mounts. Explain about Docker managed volumes and bind mount volumes. What are the pros and cons? Also explain the below commands and their differences. Explain the below commands and their purpose. How will you see Docker events and filter Docker events for last 1 hour? When to use Docker run command with memory swap equal to 0 option. How will you view and stop all processes running in a container? List some container breakout scenarios and steps to avoid them. Why the below command is special. What is the default entry point for a Docker container? How to override the entry point specified in the Docker file. Assume there are 5 run instructions in a Docker file. How many image layers will be created on executing them? How to list the ID of layers created and how to access them. What happens if one of the run fails? Will container image will be generated? How to access the image layer created by the successful run command and retry executing the failed run commands. Have you used https imagelayers.io? Which command is used to list out all the layers of Docker image? Explain the below commands and its purpose. What are the default list of capabilities that Docker provides for a Linux image-based container? Few are below. What is the use of net bind service capability? Why it is important? Demo how to use PSCAP to ensure that the below enabled capabilities in a Linux image-based container is removed. What are the available restart options for a Docker container? List them with use cases. Explain the command below. What are the other restart options available? How to set the number of restart attempts in Docker run command. For the below commands, will the internal port map to 3306 remain same after executing the commands? If not, how to have the same internal port mapping even when the container is restarted. Demo an example usage of retry with exponential backoff in Docker. How to retry with exponential backoff differs from circuit breaker pattern. Which Docker command sends sagkill, saghub, which is more preferred for web application container environment. What is the difference between Docker htop and Docker top commands? What are the findings of public Docker image vulnerability research? Which image distributions have least and most vulnerabilities? Demo how to use Docker with Vault services like HashiCorp or CyberArk Vault systems. Explain about vulnerabilities listed below: Shell Shock, Heartbleed, glibc host, SSH death alert. List some common vulnerabilities and exposures for Docker. List the possible ways to detect image vulnerabilities. How to scan vulnerabilities in Docker CE edition. Do you have experience with twist lock? How to interact it with CI workflow? Explain more about runtime defense with twist lock incident explorer. Do you know about CIS Docker benchmark? Detail few under container runtimes, host configuration. List tools that can help to check this Docker environment. Share your knowledge on Docker Bench for security. What are the alternatives and compare with Docker security scanning. Explain how Tesla cloud hack happened and how it can be avoided and detected. Also detail about cryptojacking and Docker images. How to check the authenticity of an image in Docker Hub. Jenkins is used by most companies. How Jenkins server exploitation happened. How it can be avoided and detected if you are using Jenkins Docker image. Explain how to use Docker Bench security image to audit a Docker image, host and configuration details. What are the key sections audited? Demo how to configure Docker to work with system control. Also explain how to control a Docker application using systemd. For instance, a Java application for sending emails. What is the difference between below commands? Docker Compose. Write a sample services section in Docker Compose file for 3 replicas, worker, node, role, and to restart on failure. How do you use networks in Docker Compose file for service containers linking instead of outdated using links way of doing it? Docker Compose file can be very complex as it is YAML based. How to visualize a Docker Compose file? What tools you have used for this? How to use environmental variable from Linux shell in Docker Compose file. What will happen if we have a variable with same name declared inside the file? How you linked multiple Docker Compose files. Since extents is outdated, how to use different Docker Compose files for specific environment like dev pro staging. What are the types of logging driver available for Docker Compose? What is the default one? How to limit the size of the log file? What is the difference between below commands? Is it true that from command can be used multiple times in Docker file? If yes, what is the purpose? Also explain the below instructions and how many images will be generated. What is the need of multiple compose files? How to use multiple compose files and how to overwrite a base compose file. How you used different compose files for development and production. Explain what are the steps taken like port mapping. Docker Swarm. What is a microservices architecture? What are the key layers and components involved in a microservices architecture like logging, communication, REST layer, etc.? Relate microservices layers and components to Swarm components like nodes, services, cluster for autoscaling, authorization, logging. How suitable is Kubernetes Swarm with Docker for microservices? What is your option on this? Optionally, can you explain about the 12 factors of a 12-factor app and how the components can be related to a Swarm architecture? Detail an architecture for 2 nodes running a total of 6 container instances with 2 services using Swarm. In the design, also address common components and the issues such as CI/CD integration, microservices, web traffic SSL termination, service discovery, service update, API gateway, reverse proxy. How you measured round trip time between containers under different load, and similarly explain how you performed stress test on container clusters. For REST-based API web service like a weather forecasting service, write the steps to create a swarm with replicas. Also list the third-party components that can be used for this. Note that for historical data needs DB storage. For an instance, enterprise project with multiple services like that of Uber, suggest an architecture based on Docker Swarm. For a web application deployed in Swarm, what are the different ways to make sure that the requests hit the same container for session persistence? Also demo how to use HTTP reverse proxy or by using traffic to do the same. Can worker nodes running on different versions Docker engine can communicate to the same manager node? Share your practical experience with this kind of setup. Detail about Swarmzilla, Swarm 3K project and its importance. Have you used database related service in Swarm? How was the performance before and after containerization? Why Docker Swarm may not be suitable for a big data environment like Apache, Hadoop or Spark. A basic question: how Docker Swarm works? Explain in detail about service, worker nodes, task distribution, volumes, replicas and network. What are the cons with Swarm and how you addressed them? How it is catching up with Kubernetes? What's the future of Swarm? How many nodes can Docker Swarm handle? Is it well suited for companies with less than 200 containers? Assume there are no extra nodes available. How does Swarm acts to allocate resources? Explain with a diagram of how routing mesh works in Swarm. Explain with a real-life example like chat application, blog application with global presence. Will a manager node will also run instances, replicas, or its job is just limited to distribute tasks to the worker nodes? List the related commands involved for using a web portal running in Swarm mode with 3 replicas and 6 nodes for TCP only access with port mapping done between 8080 to 80 in routing mesh. Explain about 3 of 3 manager topology and 1 plus 1 plus 1 while 5 of 3 manager topology. For a swarm size of 7, what is the optional nodes count majority and fault tolerance? Draw an optimal distributed topology for 6 of 4, 6 manager cluster working across 4 data centers. What is the recommended count for manager nodes in a swarm? If no replicas option is specified, then the default value is 3. Is it true? Which daemon processes run on ports 3376 TCP and 2376 TCP? Number 2. What are the associated processes on the ports 7946 TCP, 7946 UDP, 4789 UDP? How to start Swarm in debug mode? What are the different log levels available? List some example for panic and fatal levels. What is a failure domain? How it plays an important role in Swarm HA. Relate to a real-life use case. What is the minimal number of Swarm managers recommended to have for a Swarm cluster hosting business critical applications? What is the minimal number of discovery service instances recommended to have a Swarm cluster serving business critical applications? Which of the following equations for fault tolerance and quorum? Answer the below questions. How many manager nodes you had in your project? Explain in detail about how to create multi-manager nodes. Share your experience. What is the limitation on the number of manager nodes? Why always odd numbers of manager nodes is recommended? Can manager nodes spread across multiple zones? If yes is the answer, what is the recommended architecture for that? What are the possible states of a manager node in a cluster? What are the 3 states of availability of a node? If all manager nodes go down, will the tasks in the worker nodes will continue or worker nodes will also cease? How to list all the tasks and service processes in manager node? How this list will different from worker nodes? What is the command to join as a manager node using a token XXXXX and clusters IP? When to use the option advertise address? When to use the option and what happens if it is not specified? In addition, explain the below command. What are the possible ways to make a worker to leave from a Swarm?